So next, actually, the newest LTI service is a membership services. So what is it about? Well, for that, we need to understand how the roster information is actually propagated in typical LTI. So here as a tool provider, I only know a user exists when a user launches. So as this user launch, then I see a new user and I can add it to my roster. And when another user comes around, then I discover that user and I can add it. If this user here actually is removed from the course, I have no idea that that's happening. I'm just never going to get a login from that user again. Well, that works fine for many activities, but sometimes some tool providers would need to get more information about the roster. For example, they would need to offer some kind of grouping functionality, and for that, the instructor would need to go upfront, get access to the roster in the tool provider without having to wait that each and every student actually performs at least one lunch. And so for that, the membership service or kind of a roster service lets the tool provider access the full roster of a course. So now when the instructor launches here, this will contain the membership endpoint, and it can go and query here. So what this service is going to provide is going to give you all users information that you would get on a regular student lunch, but now you can get it up front. So that means, for example, that in the tool provider you said that a link cannot get email, then this roster information will not contain the user's email also. So now here in one go you get the full roster. And we know, especially in this MOOC era, that the roster can be quite big. And so if we want to keep in sync, what we don't want to do is keep asking for the full roster and keeping it in sync. So in addition to getting the full roster will contain a delta, a difference link. And then you can always trigger that link to get only the changes that happen since you get the last roster. So basically what it would become is that you do a full roster for the first time as a tool provider. Then you use a delta link to keep your roster in sync. You might do a full roster from time to time to make sure you're okay, but that's how you would actually keep your roster up to date. And so we can have a quick look at the actual documentation. So we see here membership. We can look at the media type, and we see the media type will contain the user information, so user ID, source ID, email, family name. Again, you're gonna get here what you would get on the user launch anyway, but you can get it up front. And also we see here that it's a container, it's one of those IMS containers, so they all follow the same paradigm to be paginated. So you can get, so you don't get, if it's a big roster, you might get it in multiple pages. And here is a delta. Right now it's called differences. The name might change, but basically that link lets you get a list of updates compared to the last time you got information about the roster. And the tricky thing about updates is that how do you deal with a deletion, with member being removed? And this is why you have the status here now, because you can have a status of saying that a user has been removed, and that's how you would know a user has dropped from the roster. So we see here the status saying deleted. That's really useful, again, purely for the difference or the delta view, because when you get the full roster, those won't be listed. So back on the adoption map, I've added outcome management and membership service here. So they're still in draft, and so they're still a little bit far away. I think membership will get probably a bit sooner because it's a simpler spec, but it's a good time, because they're in public draft, it's a good time to review them, see if they meet your need, and propose any changes, or if you see any shortcomings with the proposals. I've also added here content name request and arrow towards adoption, because I think this one is also getting a lot of traction. And I've added CASA. So what is CASA? CASA is the a way to discover LTI tool providers. It's a kind of, they call it an app store, but it has no e-commerce aspect to it that I know of. but it's more a way for if you have your little app store that decides a bunch of tool providers and other resources that you set up in your institution, then you can have another store somewhere from another institution, and you can set up a sharing aspect. So now here, if you list an interesting resource, then you can set up rules that propagates from one store to another. That's really my understanding of CASA. So that's being sponsored by UCLA. It's an interesting one to propagate to providers and other resources from one institution to another, and possibly here you could also have a publisher. And finally, another one I have added here that I haven't talked much in this presentation is Common Cartridge. So Common Cartridge has been along for a very long time. It's a way to package a course, and this means web resources in a course, quizzes and stuff like that. And it also gives a structure to your resources. You're following a tree representation. So one thing you can put in a Common Cartridge, obviously, is an LTI link. And that's becoming very useful in a way to share a set of links pre-configured inside a Common Cartridge. So now you can use a Common Cartridge to come around, and this Common Cartridge will contain a set of links with the custom parameters required for the link to function. And then you can just import the Common Cartridge, and the links are going to appear in their own folder in your course. So you could have, like, for example, week 1, and then it would have an LTI link to some resource like an assessment, and an LTI link to a reading activity. All of those are still externally, but pre-configured with the right parameters right away. And to even simplify that, because LTI is just XML and the structure is also in the manifest XML of the Common Cartridge, there is something called the fin Common Cartridge. And so the fin Common Cartridge, because the Common Cartridge, because it needs to embed all the resources, is a zip file. But the fin Common Cartridge is just a manifest, which is an XML document. And the XML document embeds the structure, but also all the LTI links description. So now you don't have to import a zip file, you just have to import an XML and get a bunch of containers with the links pre-configured. So that's the fin cartridge. So that closes the a view of the LTI and LTI related specification. So one thing I haven't talked just yet is the C, the Caliper. So I will finish the presentation with that. With Caliper, we go back to the idea of a black box. Caliper lets you now send atomic interaction events back into the tool consumer. So on the tool consumer side, now you can have a new service, which is the Caliper event store. And basically here I represent it as distinct entities. So that's the event store. And the event store is going to receive events now from the tool provider. So on launch, one way to get this to work out is that on launch you can pass the endpoint for the Caliper store, Caliper event store. And here this is going to send it back atomic learning events. So what's a learning event? Learning event is a simple bit of interaction. So for example, opening a chapter, taking a test, submitting a test, those kind of thing. And for the tool provider to be able to send those events, the first thing it needs to do is to have some kind of endpoint. And the IMS is going to provide API, actually, what's called a sensor API, for the main languages that's going to help you basically connect with an event store to push those events and push those events in the right format. So what is the format? So Caliper defines a grammar. It's following a typical triple format where you have a subject, a verb, and an object. So here the subject is a learning context. So what can be a learning context? For example, a learning context can be a student inside a course using a given tool. That's a learning context. Who is doing the action? And then you have the action itself, like open a book, something like that. Then you have the learning activity. So which book is being opened, which chapter, for example. So that's a typical triple. And what's really important with Caliper is not just that it defines a grammar, but most importantly, it defines a vocabulary. It's going to define what is called matrix profiles. They're going to normalize the description of the most common type of events in the most common type of interaction you find into the learning landscape. So, for example, a reading interaction, so opening a reader, or taking a test, or consuming medias, or going onto discussion forums. And so, by standardizing on the vocabulary, it's easier to aggregate those events, because you can have 2 or 3 kinds of readers, different kind of assignment providers, different kind of media, different kind of forums, but they produce the same events. And so it's easier to aggregate and then derive sense out of it. What I show here is the tool provider reporting back to a tool consumer. But as we know, the learning landscape is getting more and more heterogeneous, and you can use your mobile, you can have different devices, you can have multiple tool providers, even multiple tool consumers inside an institution, and at the end, everybody is a black box of someone else. And this is why here, by standardizing on the vocabulary, you can actually gather the information from multiple black boxes and try to get a unified meaning out of those. And so here we see here multiple of those boxes, and for example, one could be a tool consumer here, another could be a tool consumer, and this can be a mobile reader. And anyway, many different things. And so the way they propagate to consumers, it can be a star model where everybody's get a sensor API and they communicate directly to the event store. So that could be kind of a star model, but it's because the issue is how do you grant the right to publish to the event store and propagate that information down. And more of a ring approach often could also work, where for example here you can have a tool consumer, and here are all the tool providers, and they communicate directly to this one then relay to the event store, and then this one is also a tool provider, but is also communicating with its own thing, so it relays here and through the trust established between those 2 partners, and then communicate back here, which goes to the event store. So the topology might differ, but at the end, the idea here is that in the event store, you aggregate a bunch of events that are following the same format and the same meanings, and so it becomes easier to derive a sense and meaning, and then use this data, because Caliper is only about how to get the data in a standard format in a single place. But what you make out of it, what kind of meaning, how you use it, is another story. Well, if you're still around after an hour, that means you're really interested in that stuff. So thank you first for watching this, and I'm going to give you a few extra pointers. The first one, of course, is the IMS Global website, and there they have an LTI developer section, so you can go there and find resources, sample of codes, and stuff like that. Then you might also attend one of the IMS quarterly meetings where they have an LTI bootcamp, so it's a full day dedicated to LTIs. So that's the things that you might find interesting too. We're also going to point out to the Tsugi framework. It's a PHP framework, and that's really taking all of the LTI plumbing out of you to help you do an LTI provider, but purely on focusing on the actual functionality you want to offer, and it's taking care of the LTI aspect for you. So that's a thing to look at, and you can always email me if you have questions. I can give that a shot, and I will also give my Twitter handle. Okay, so thank you for watching. See you around. Bye.